All right, it's Cat Shades, the heavy metal picker here. And yeah, I know a guy who wanted to pull a Nathan Gale on Trey from Morbid Angel. The events in this story took place before the whole Nathan Gale fiasco at the El Rosa Villa with Dimebag Darrell and the other victims. This story that I'm about to tell you took place in 2002. And yes, it's a serious story. It's not a joke video. If you want a joke video, I've got a bunch of other funny videos for you. So anyhow, let's start with this story. This took place starting in January, maybe February of 2002. I knew a guy, I'm not going to name his real name, but he was my roommate at the time, and he was a Morbid Angel fan. And anyhow, he eventually got it into his head that he should fly to Florida to meet, Trey and do whatever, I guess. So he flew to Florida, and he was completely crazy at the time, had schizophrenia and other such issues. And he never made it to meet any of the members of Morbid Angel. He, with all of his clothes on, jumped into a lake somewhere in the Tampa area. And anyone who's familiar with Florida knows you can't go around jumping in lakes in Florida because there are alligators in the lakes. He was fished out by some authorities and was promptly thrown into a mental hospital. His father had to fly down to Florida and mess around with him, get him out of the hospital, bring him back. And this guy's been, ever since then, he doesn't work. He's just smokes marijuana, watches TV, feels sorry for himself. And anyhow, throughout the remaining years that I was in contact with him, he had this thought that Trey from Morbid Angel was putting these thoughts into his head and was saying all these bad things about him, was casting spells on him, was causing all this bad stuff in his life. And anyhow, later in that year, in 2002, he wanted to go to Detroit because Morbid Angel was doing a tour. It may have been with Motorhead at the time. I'm not totally sure. But anyhow, this tour, the closest one that was coming to our city was in Detroit, Michigan. And at this time, Eric Rutan would have been in the band. Jared Anderson would have been fronting Morbid Angel. And my former roommate, who had all these delusions about Trey, said, I'm going to go get a gun and I'm going to go up to Detroit and I'm going to pull a Nathan Gale on Trey. And I said, look, I don't think that this is a good idea. I didn't take him too seriously for two reasons. This was before Nathan Gale. If this was after Nathan Gale, I probably would have had taken this a bit more seriously. But I also knew at the time, and this is still true to this day, this man hates driving any distance even further than the Wendy's drive-through. It's too long for him to drive. He hated driving. And I knew driving 3 hours to Detroit would probably be a little bit difficult for him. I also knew that this guy's very lazy, and him going through the trouble of getting a gun would probably, and the expense of getting a gun probably would have been too much for him, and he would have, not gone through with it. Now, for years and years, and then here's another thing. Then MySpace came about. So this 2005, 2006, he was in contact with Trey from Morbid Angel. Trey had no idea all this other stuff in 2002 happened with my friend flying down to Florida and, thinking that Trey was casting spells on him. But anyhow, he had been in communication with Trey via MySpace, and I guess they were playing that Quake game, and I have no idea how this Quake game or the messaging system on it worked. I haven't played video games since I turned 18 back in 1995. I have no idea how that goes. But I did see messages sent back and forth that he'd showed me between himself and Trey, and I guess they were, exchanging guitar files or, let's check this out, listen to this, listen to that. And anyhow, eventually he made some really wacko accusations that Trey was putting thoughts in his head and casting spells on him. And eventually Trey cut off communication with him. I don't blame him at all for doing that. I had since had a falling out with this person, hadn't spoken to him in years, but from what I gather, people still to this day are saying, oh yeah, this guy believes that, Trey from Morbid Angel's out to get him and casting weird spells on him and stuff. So, yeah, but 20 years has passed since this original incident. I would like to think that this person is no longer a threat to Trey. But, yeah, it just goes to show you, like, it just takes one wacko fan to, ruin your day or ruin your life. And, thankfully, Trey's, gone pretty, well, throughout his career. And, hopefully he'll, not kill himself with the drinking.